Ladies and gentlemen, friends, members of the EAT family, welcome to the afternoon side plenary on Outliers in social impact. My name is Alessandro Demaio. I'm a medical officer with the World Health Organization, and I'm also Australian, and that's going to show in this afternoon session. This afternoon session is going to be fast-paced, it's going to be very relaxed, and it's going to be as much about you in the audience as it is us up here on stage. We're not going to be talking at you, we're going to be talking with you. I should explain what's about to happen. We're going to have 5 outliers of social impact who are going to present for 6 minutes and 25 seconds each. Why 6 minutes and 25 seconds? So we've given these 5 poor souls, because they've been so brilliant in their area, at creating or changing or reshaping the food system for a better planet and a better population. We've given them 6 minutes and 25 seconds, 25 seconds on 15 slides that after 25 seconds will automatically move on. Now, they know this, you now know this, so fingers crossed nothing goes untoward. But we have 5 brilliant speakers and we're very excited that you could join us. This session is not about who, and it's not about what, but it's about how, and I'll explain what I mean. Last century, food was an enabler. Food was responsible for the major gains in life expectancy and the quality of lives that we saw in populations around the world. Jump forward to 2017, and food is now the major risk factor for disease on our planet. The food sector is the major driver of greenhouse-related gases. We know that 1.9 billion people tonight will go to bed overweight or obese, not because of poor choices, but because of an issue of quality of our global diets. And we know that 800 million adults tomorrow will wake up hungry. On top of this, we know that 1 in 3 mouthfuls of food every day is wasted. What we have is no longer an issue that can be solved by quantity, but must be solved by improving quality and, of course, equity across populations. We've gone few. But at the same time, we're reaching a biological and an ecological tipping point. And what do I mean by this? Well, first of all, a biological tipping point. I work with governments and populations around the world. And what we see is that a biological tipping point in malnutrition is now emerging in 3 places in particular. We'll just go back. There we go. First of all, we know that children, so 8% of normal weight children will grow up to be obese, but 80% of obese children will never reach a healthy weight. We know that mothers who are either overweight or undernourished have a higher risk in the next generation of giving birth to children that grow up to suffer from malnutrition, particularly overweight, obesity, and NCDs. And we know that once people become overweight or obese, it's incredibly difficult to take that weight off. In fact, most populations put on more weight over their lifetime. So this is the biological tipping point, that if we don't get in early, if we don't change these factors and drivers early on, we play catch-up for the rest of their lives. But also we've heard about the ecological tipping point, the idea that different drivers, the different mechanisms and feedback loops are now in action that may see our environmental destruction, our environmental challenges race away from us if we don't act soon and we don't act definitively. Trying to do this upside down. I think I'll just do it this way. There we go. Nope. Okay. Now we have our 17 goals. We have our 17 goals. We have our 6 nutrition targets. We have our 2-degree goal from Paris. But quite frankly, we're not on track to achieve these. And continuing with business as usual is not going to get us where we need to go. So we've talked a lot about the challenges and what we don't have. What do we have? Well, the session today is framed around both the United Nations Decade of Action, and the EAT Foundation. The United Nations Decade of Action gives us a 10-year window where governments, heads of governments, prime ministers and presidents have agreed to act on malnutrition, have agreed to move towards and achieve sustainable, resilient food systems for healthy diets. But we also have outliers out there. We have individuals, organisations who, in a gridlocked world, have managed to move an agenda forward effectively and efficiently. And we've found 5 of those and brought them to Stockholm today. These are exemplars of success. They're outliers of impact. And the question that we want to ask ourselves is, what can we learn from these people? Not the who, not the what, but the how. Is there a recipe for their success? What are those ingredients? This is the question that we want to ask today, and this is the question that we can learn and learn from. And finally, can we bottle and scale this to catalyse progress everywhere? This is the takeaway menu for today's session. On that note, I would now like to introduce the first of our 5 speakers, Danny from Food Tank. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really delighted to be here and want to thank the EAT Forum for all of the work they do. For the record, Food Tank is not used to talking about ourselves. Our own work is really focused on elevating and promoting the incredible work of farmers, activists, eaters, businesses, and foundations. And we're really excited to be able to do this work because we think by elevating others, we elevate the whole movement. Our big challenge has been in creating a platform for highlighting solutions in a world where bad news pays and plays better than good news. So many research organizations, funders, news, and media outlets have really focused on doom and gloom, while and I feel like while the problems are extremely important to point out, they can't be the only thing that we focus on. The urgency is far too great to stop there. We need to also focus on the good, on what's working, on the stories of hope and success that will inspire change in agriculture, and find the ways that are needed to alleviate hunger and obesity, food loss and food waste, and conflict and poverty, while also protecting the environment. I've had this extraordinary opportunity over the last several years to travel to 70+ countries to do research, interviewing hundreds and hundreds of farmers and scientists and policymakers and journalists and women and youth groups, and really hear from them directly what innovations, practices, and other things that are working for them deserve more research, more attention, and more funding. And what we've heard is that it's not always the fancy technologies, the expensive ones, that will work. They won't always have the most bang for the buck. Instead, it's a combination of high and low technologies that focus on nutrient density, on resilience, and small and medium scale entrepreneurial innovations that will make food just, sustainable, accessible, and affordable for everyone, whether they live here in Stockholm, in Somalia, or where I live in New Orleans. Food Tank is really a community for experts to come together, share ideas, discuss challenges, and develop innovations. Our goal is really to be a big tent, from eaters to teachers, scientists to politicians, farmers and farm workers, to industry. We try to combine both conservative and liberal viewpoints. We do this because we have learned that preaching to the choir doesn't work. We need to facilitate dialogue among those who always don't agree with one another. And it works. The public and private discussions we facilitate have led to changes to help ending labor disputes, to creating new partnerships, to changing business practices, and fostering honest and blunt dialogue. There are a couple of things that I'm proud of that I think make our approach powerful. First, we reach out to reporters and journalists in every country that we visit. We get suggestions from them about local experts to talk to, about local government policies, and we also share our own contacts with them and try to give their stories a wider audience. In a media environment that's saturated with press releases and tweets, we know it's the human connection that will ultimately pay off in terms of those human connections that can pay off in better, honest coverage that our audience can have faith in. And I just want to point out again, we're not promoting Food Tank's work. We're promoting the work of the dozens and hundreds of organizations around the world that are doing this work every day on the ground. The other relationship building that we do is with the academic community, both professors and students. And this has been something that Food Tank has tried to do from the very beginning. Thousands of professors and students are part of our academic networks, and we organize all of our events, our Food Tank summits, in partnership with universities and other academic institutions. We've worked with George Washington University, the Tufts University School of Nutrition Science and Policy, and dozens of others. And we integrate young voices and student-led initiatives and projects into those discussions so that they also can get a wider platform. And we are also able to leverage a large global audience of people who care about building a better food system, including our 1 million followers across all of our social media platforms, our 350,000 weekly newsletter subscribers, the thousands of people who attend our events and also visit our website every day. Our ingredients for success include listening first to farmers. They know that solutions need to come from the ground up and to actually be participatory and work and be scaled out. We also listen to eaters. They vote with their forks and they vote with their votes. Consumers are leading the food system to change, demanding that businesses and policymakers really understand the true costs of food and create more transparency. We engage with businesses on every level. I spend a lot of time advising both small and large businesses alike, and I'm amazed at how many of these companies are, without a lot of fanfare or publicity, are looking for ways to change their practices, to waste less, to reduce packaging, and to build more resilient and sustainable practices into their businesses. It's hard for me to admit, but I think we've made a few critical mistakes. One, we focus too much on English-speaking Africa and other parts of the global South. Which is a mistake that I feel like many funders who I've criticized also do. But some of the coolest and most impactful innovations are really happening in places where people are least heard. The second mistake is we've learned to understand that sometimes we don't always see the reality on the ground clearly. We make appointments with projects and we go and visit them, and we understand that that's not only, we're seeing a very sort of manufactured version of what they're doing. At times, I know I should dig deeper into those projects, but don't always have the time or the resources to do it. Third, I think one big mistake that I've made personally, and you can literally see it on my face, is that I travel too much. I sometimes eat bad food, and I don't get enough time to think about and contemplate the work that we're seeing on the ground, that Food Tank is helping create, and also all the hope and inspiration that I'm seeing every day. I also would like to remind myself that, if I was starting out today, Food Tank started about 4 years ago, is that people actually want to do the right thing, no matter what side they're on. And I've discovered that villainizing different companies or funders isn't really getting us anywhere. And while it's not always true, there's usually more common ground than I expect to find. And that common ground is really the best foundation for change. And I've also discovered that Food Tank can play a real role in propelling that common ground, keeping our research simple, understandable, accessible, palatable, and relatable to a wide audience. We can help highlight farmers' successes and challenges and help get them the resources that they need to do their jobs better. We can help make eaters feel more connected to their food, inspiring them to change their own habits. And we can work with funders, researchers, organizations, and companies to facilitate those changes. I will stop there. Thank you again for this incredible opportunity, and I'm excited about the questions.
Before you go, I just wanted to ask you a quick question myself. You talked about relatability and responsibility, and you talked about partners and personal stories. One of the challenges that we all face in moving this agenda forward is reaching beyond the echo chamber, beyond the same people saying the same things to each other, and which makes us feel great.
Right.
Now, you've managed to build in 4 years a movement of over 1 million people on social media and 300,000 people through your newsletters. And when I look, 350,000. And when I look at the organisations, the people that are involved, it's very much beyond the echo chamber. So how have you managed to break through beyond the usual people in the food space?
I mean, it's something I've always tried to do. This is, an area of interest for me for the last 15 years. And I think creating those contacts, building them, showing people that I'm not out to attack them when we're talking about corporations, or being able to relate to farmers because I've worked on farms. Those are the ways you interact with people. You find them where they are, where they can relate to you, and you hone in on that. And I think that's one of our strengths, that people feel very relatable to us. They feel like they can talk to us. I get, hundreds of emails every week from farmers, from businesses, from policymakers trying to, figure out ways that they can solve problems in their own communities. And we're able to connect them with the people we know. If we don't have the answer, we usually know someone who can help them.
Fantastic. Thank you again, Danny.
Thank you.
And we now invite our next speaker, waste warrior, internationally renowned waste warrior, Tristram Stewart, who will continue many of these same fascinating themes. Over to you, Tristram. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks, Sandro. Thanks very much. So I've slung up one pretty random selection of quotes. We're being told we need to double food production or massively increase it by Monsanto, by the FAO, by a whole load of other things. It's the dominant voice in the food system. The first problem with this solution to the world's problem of food is that it's wrong, and the second is that it's actually the biggest long-term threat to global food security. It's going to destroy the planet. We don't have any way of increasing food in the way that's needed without destroying our planet. So my job has been to tackle that. And the principal way in which I've done that has been to expose the biggest hypocrisy, namely the fact that a third of all of that food we're producing is already being wasted. We're already consuming more in rich countries than is good for us. So I've really focused in on the issue of food waste as really kind of the underbelly, the vulnerable underbelly of that paradigm, that increasing production is what we need. I started that by campaigning really as a teenager and then a 20-something rummaging in the bins of supermarkets. Eventually I got round to publishing this quite serious tome, 350 pages of densely argued text and numbers, in which I established that 1/3 of all the world's food was being wasted. And that really kicked off a global debate. It's been since then endorsed by the likes of the UN, this kind of data crunching. But the book wasn't enough. I needed to make it appetizing, fun, engaging, and inspiring, getting people really involved in everything that they as individuals can do and that they can do to change the food system that they're participating in. I organized the first Feeding the 5,000 event in 2009. We fed 5,000 people in Trafalgar Square with food that otherwise would be wasted. We've taken that event now as a platform for launching national and regional food waste campaigns to around 50 cities around the world. We've galvanized a global movement, and now, as we've heard time and time again, basically you can't be a big food company, a government, or an international institution without doing something about your food waste. But we try and make it both challenging to the food system, but also fun and practical. We've done loads of other formats of events. Feeding the 5,000 was just the beginning. This is the first disco soup in Africa. Disco soup is a bit like the same thing, getting food that would otherwise be wasted, getting people to prepare it, getting DJs and musicians to play music, have a big party. Basically, the underlying theory of this is if you want to defeat the corporate machine that is destroying nature and turning it into cash and bad food, you have to throw a better party than them. And we try to make it practical. We get volunteers out to fields to harvest food that would otherwise be wasted, wonky carrots, oversized lettuces. Get that to hungry people through the charities that feed hungry people. It's a great way of getting volunteers engaged, but it's also a huge platform for media to come along and tell the story about why that food was being left in the field in the first place. Through that kind of media coverage, that positive story, which is pretty much an unassailable way of doing your campaigning, you galvanize public opinion and amplify it. And it's figures like this that makes the CEOs of the big supermarkets and the leaders of the governments take note and listen. It's the threat to brand damage, if you like, and the invitation to do something more positive that gets these corporations excited and makes them race towards reducing food waste. This is a nice little example of the kind of strategic engagement we have. You'll see that on the left, you've got trimmed beans, and we found in our research in Kenya that trimming these beans to get them into exact 9-centimeter punnets, when the beans, frankly, didn't know they had to be 9 centimeters long, meant that 15 to 20% of the beans were being cut off at that final stage. We really campaigned on this, fed loads of people with bean trimmings and waste beans, took the evidence that we had gathered to Tesco's and other supermarkets, and sure enough, got them to change the way they do their beans. This cut waste by 30% overnight. If you transpose that to all of the green beans being exported from Kenya to Europe, that would be about 0.04% of the entire Kenyan economy represented just in beans. It's a classic example of how easy it is to make this kind of change, and customers preferred it. The longevity of the bean, the shelf life extended enormously, so it was one of those triple wins. These ladies who have grown basil in Kenya aren't even going to harvest any of it. They've had their order cancelled. And we've also worked with legislators in the United Kingdom and are now pushing for similar legislation across Europe to say that supermarkets can no longer cancel orders and cause a cost and a waste to their suppliers. This picture is bread being wasted in a sandwich factory. These are all the crusts that I identified. I published it in my book. It's always really annoyed me that we waste so much bread. About 42% of the UK's bread is being wasted. It's something that we've campaigned on, something we've argued about, we've got so far. But my most recent innovation is, again, having a better party than the people that are wasting it. We turn this waste bread, surplus fresh bread, day fresh from the factories, and we turn it into craft ale. Toast Ale is a company I started last year. We're already in the UK, in the US. We've got franchises in Reykjavik and in South Africa. We're going to be doing this all over the world, and there are loads of replica companies now doing it. 100% of the profits of Toast Ale go to the charity Feedback that I founded. So we've been asked to talk about some of our mistakes. I wish I'd evaluated our impact better from the beginning, because we've seen enormous impact. In the UK, we've measured it, 25% reduction in household food waste in the UK, roughly equivalent in companies, but we don't have the data of our impact elsewhere in the world. We've constantly innovated, but we prioritize spontaneity over strategy. I think that's got strengths. It's also clearly got weaknesses. And the other thing that I have definitely learned was a mistake is not to ask for help. This is a picture of me asking for help, essentially. We're very good at helping others. We promote all the solutions that we find around the world. But we've only just started asking people to help us. We've set up the Feedbacker network, where people can actually contribute financially to Feedback's work. Those are my 3 areas of error, and I will stop there because my time is out. Thank you very much.
Stay on stage, stay on stage.
Oh, yeah, you have a question for me.
I have a question for you. Amazing ideas. When I was reading, I've heard about your work for many years, Tristram, and followed it very closely. And the idea of toast ale and disco soup, it sounds, I was sort of, suddenly my dinner seems very boring. But I wanted to ask you the idea, so you talked about better beans and you talked about beer from bread. But what I'm interested in is, how did you come up with these ideas? Do you just have a brain that kind of sees bread and links it with beer? Do you have a think tank of friends? Do you go off into the woods and kind of reflect? Do you spend a lot of time on aeroplanes looking out at the horizon? What is the process for you? How did you make these connections?
Very clear answer to that question, and that is that it is not me. When I started, you could fill this part of the stage with people whose job it was to fight food waste. Now, you could fill this hotel of the industry globally. This is a mass global movement. We are everywhere. There are entrepreneurs. There were so many entrepreneurs writing to me about their ideas to tackle food waste that we had to set up the Food Surplus Entrepreneurs Network, now its own organization called FoodWin, the Food Waste Innovation Network, to house all of these literally hundreds. Toastale is one example of hundreds of companies that are turning waste fruit into juices, into ice creams, into chutneys, into God knows what. The beer idea, again, not my idea. Ancient Babylonians were making beer out of bread.
So you're just reading through the ancient Babylonian text?
No, I met the Belgian brewer who revived the Babylon beer back in 2015. He makes loads of great craft ales. One of them was made out of bread. I said, this is a damn cool idea. I have a global network of food waste activists. There is a global movement of craft ale making. These people are made to collaborate. I can globalize this idea. So he came over, we got Jamie Oliver down, filmed it, making the first brew in the UK, adapted the recipe, launched the company. He open-sourced it, we open-sourced our recipe. We say, look, we can do this everywhere. Do it with us, franchising. We'll make our own companies everywhere. But if you don't want to do it with us, copy us. Here's the recipe. And you open source it, you mobilize people, you inspire people, you have a better party than everyone else.
I love that, better party than
and people will come and join. And the brainstorms, you saw that disco soup in Africa. We didn't have a plan, we just invited everyone down. And about 4 initiatives started off the back of that party. There's now all of those waste fruits and vegetables that we were uncovering and making a meal with. There's now a program that's feeding 80,000 kids on the streets in Nairobi using that stuff. It's like, just get the ideas out there, get some energy into it, and people come up with their open-sourced ideas.
So we expect all of the solutions to the world's problems to come out of the party tonight, is what you're saying?
Absolutely. I really think,
at least 10 initiatives.
Yeah, I mean, we're being told by Monsanto what we need. I say that what we need, sorry, homebrewers, little pun, what we need is solution. You get it?
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that was...
Is solutions
I think it's
toast
rising
ale.
slowly.
Yeah, that's it.
It's a good one.
Use your loaf. Thank you very much.
More puns later. I now hand over to our next speaker from Albert, who's coming to us from South Africa. Councillor will tell us about the rise of city-based movements. Over to Albert. Please join in welcoming him. Thanks, buddy.
Good afternoon, and it's nice to be here. In Cape Town, we have developed what we call urban agriculture, and our city's perspective to it is that urban agriculture is the production, processing, and marketing of crops, vegetables, tree, and other non-food crops and animals, fisheries, and within the city boundaries or in the immediate surroundings. This is happening. It's not very, very old. It's just new. And there are some challenges that are around. Some of the planners and decision makers are negative towards urban agriculture, and other people regard it as an ancient hobby, and they think it will not make any impact whatsoever. And also there are obstacles and success to urban farmers. What's happening in Cape Town? In the past, we had a lot of animals roaming around, uncontrollable and so on. But because we are building a city that we want it to become a world city, in 2007, we managed to come up with a policy that we enforced, and we were able to get rid of that mess. Whenever you go around Cape Town, you will not see what is on those pictures anymore. Policy regime. We came up with a policy in the city of Cape Town so that we can bring all stakeholders together, and we ensure that this urban agriculture is happening in the most sustainable way. And we are not only driving this independently, but we bring all other strategies, and we link it to urban agriculture, because the biggest challenge that we are facing there is poverty and unemployment. Therefore, there's food shortage in South Africa and in Cape Town. But when we did an impact assessment, we found out that urban agriculture helps the community members to create jobs, provide people with nutrition, financial income, help the unemployed, trains individuals about food, and helps the old people, some of them who are bored and retired. In the next slide, you will see there is a map with areas where this urban agriculture is happening. In total, in Cape Town, we've got about 700 food gardens happening. Ingredients for success. We decided to come up with a policy and a legal and regulatory framework so that this become no longer informal, and we ensure that the people who are practicing urban agriculture have access to research, knowledge, and use of technology. We included urban agriculture people to work closely with the city land use management and spatial planning department, so that we assist them to access land. We create also linkages, as I said earlier on, with other strategies, and we build national and international partnership to augment resources and gain insight and best practices to expand urban agriculture basket support. Another thing that we decided to do is that we linked the city departments. We've got about 10 departments in the city of Cape Town, and we want to promote this urban agriculture in such a way that it does not damage the environment. We use low carbon fertilizers. We give skills to people to practice urban agriculture. And we are arranging with financial institutions to assist them to borrow money so that they can have equipment and so on. Lessons that we have learned: ideally, people must be they must self-select themselves into groups, because in the past, when we started this, we gave people stipend, but we learned that when we stopped giving stipend, although the food that they produce helps themselves, they decided not to work. So rather than pushing food gardens programs only from home, we've decided also to utilize open spaces within our city. Some of them we built parks, some of them we changed them into food gardens, so that we improve food security in the city of Cape Town. You can see how it looks like, those food gardens and the quality of greens that they are producing. Future plans that we have is to broaden service delivery capacity, involve social and interested officials from other line departments more closely in supporting agriculture, urban agriculture. In other words, the city has officials that are dedicated to help people to make this work. We also decided to encourage people to shift focus of urban agriculture development towards growing their own food instead of always buying food with barcodes. Future plans for the urban agriculture: we want to improve the utilization of networks and external assistance on offer. Assistance available from big corporate companies, assistance available from parastatals, assistance coming from overseas development agencies. Our city is working hard to get that kind of support. We are also working very hard in the scale and scope of urban agriculture and link it to higher order issues, such as effective food system and as a response to climate change. As we are aware, Cape Town is part of Paris Agreement. We are not moving, we are not going to back off. In that note, I thank you.
Thank you, Albert.
Yep.
I'm going to keep you on stage for a few moments. Is that
All
okay?
right. Sure.
So fascinating to hear about your work that you're doing as a councillor in Cape Town. I wanted to ask you, though, a question, because we're seeing, we talk about these movements. We've heard about a few movements already today, and we're going to talk more about the concept of a movement once we get everyone up on stage. But one of the movements that we've seen globally is the shift in focus to action at the city level. And this is for a number of different reasons. But I want to ask you, in Cape Town, where incredible efforts that you're leading the charge on, not just the work on urban food, but also the Green City initiatives, also the broadband implementation programs that you have. And this is part of a big comprehensive plan, this strategy, the IDP that you've talked about. Where has this leadership come from? Has it been bottom-up demand from the community? Is it a visionary in the council? Is it from even further afield? Is it something that is international? Or is it a mixture of all three? Where has the drive for this change come from, and why Cape Town?
Yeah, it is coming from all three. And I must emphasize that we have this integrated development approach, which has resulted to where we are today. For example, some of the outcomes of it, the FDI, which is a division of Financial Times, has recently ranked Cape Town to be number 21 in the cities that are global future cities. And also today, Hisense, the producer of televisions, stoves and so on, produced their 1 millionth stove, their 1 millionth television today in Cape Town.
Wow.
And so how do we do this? We all know that, when Nelson Mandela came in, he emphasized one thing: let's create South Africa that is an opportunity society. So the city of Cape Town is built on one of the pillars that is called opportunity pillar. Under that opportunity pillar, what we do, we create an enable environment for economic development and job creation. And then we leverage on city assets and other financials that are there to build an infrastructure. Our economy is infrastructure driven. That makes more investors to come and invest in Cape Town. Hence, we become the first digital city in Africa.
But to see this strategy, to see the wisdom in investing in digitalization, is it someone in your council? Is it the council itself? Has it been demand from the public? Where has this spark initiated?
The spark is, well, it was started by our mayor, Patricia Delil.
Okay.
And then we as councillors, we bought into it. And also we said we're not going to wait for the other spheres of government, like provincial government or national government. We said, let's take steps, work with business, and make this happen. So the partnerships that we formed with business resulted to us being successful in broadband rollout. For example, by June 2018, the whole of City of Cape Town will have broadband. And also in September this year, we will have a total of about new 50 electric buses coming in Cape Town, and thus reducing carbon emissions.
Air pollution and carbon emissions.
So we are working very, very hard as a council.
Another round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you, Albert. And I hand straight on to our next speaker, Florence Igal.
Hello, everybody. I'd like to thank the organizers, because until today I didn't realize that I was a successful person. So they made my day. I've been working most of my career in the UN, so it's probably more about how do you survive bureaucracy and how you try to infiltrate and generate change. So I started, from 77 to 89, I was actually a medical doctor. And I was happy to meet here again somebody I hadn't seen for 30 years who was an old colleague and boss. And so that's what it does. It brings you at the end of your career back to where you started. So at that time, I started the usual thing, Médecins Sans Frontières, Save the Children, feeding centers, nutrition surveys. We saved some lives, that's for sure. But then at the end of the day, we realized, oh God, okay, but you do it this way. So I decided that wouldn't work. It was not sustainable. And I decided to move to FAO. So FAO in 1990 was a very siloed organization. Of course, it's very different. It was led by macroeconomists and agronomists. And that's what you were saying. It's not a monolith. There's other people there. And FAO at that time was not interested in nutrition any longer, although it had been started by Lord Boydell, who was a nutritionist. When you get there, even if you're 40, you're a junior, and you remain a junior in the organization for 10 years. You can't say, I can help you change things. No resources, no visibility. Women, let's not even talk about it. Very strict bureaucratic procedures, but thank God it's Italy, so we have coffee breaks. So that's where you start doing networking and surviving. So what I realized is that you need to pilot in the field first and then feed back into the policy work and tell your boss it was his idea all the time. You have to go to all the interdisciplinary meetings you can. You meet a lot of people. You see how they think. Then you know how you can get collaboration. Then we had email, and that really saved our lives. We could bypass the organization quite a lot. Found out that nutrition was a great entry point. It's an integrating concept at micro level. I've been working a lot on building causalities model of malnutrition. It's pro-poor. It's people-centered, and it is gender-sensitive. All kinds of nice words that other people were trying to big programs. However, ministries of agriculture didn't give a damn, by and large. And the problem is FAO is a specialized agency. If we don't have a government request, we cannot do anything. And in some countries like Rwanda, they would not recognize in the 90s that they had a nutrition problem because they saw it as an admission of failure on their governance. But on the other hand, you find out that it's kind of easy to add value to already existing programs and projects. And on the whole, it's pretty culturally acceptable that, say, you want to help all children be better nourished. And we had gender projects in Nepal. They asked us, can you help? Because they don't want to hear about gender. But if you do nutrition, you do gender. Then one of the solutions was, how do we link into all the sexy wording and programs? So we had people's participation, household food security, sustainable livelihoods, humanitarian. That was great because there's a lot of malnourished people and there's a lot of donors interested. And then there was the MDGs, the SDGs, et cetera, et cetera. So these are the words that float around, if you can show that you can add value to it. So what were we doing? We were doing what we call participatory nutrition. That is, one size fits all doesn't exist. What is important to know is figure out what is going wrong. So you have a standard process which you apply to different local situations, and you're going to find different strategies. You don't do random sampling, you do purpose sampling. You don't want to miss the poorest. And you do participatory appraisal, and that gets all these people involved in planning and implementation. It's been an uphill battle. It's been an uphill battle within FAO, because of the reason I stated before. It's been an uphill battle with our colleagues in nutrition because the fashion was cost effectiveness, standard interventions, the whole delivery science period, and we really had a problem. What I take as a lesson, we need local strategies for food security and nutrition. Local institutions are key. They bring experience and knowledge we don't have as outsiders. They can contribute to assessment, planning, implementation, and M&E. You need to involve all actors, invite them all. If not, they screw up what you're doing. So they have to be there, even if you know they're not going to do anything. So we did a lot of training and planning. So what actually we were doing is moving towards what has been now called nutrition-sensitive agriculture. So you were trying your charm over coffee with forestry, irrigation, horticulture. Do you have a little leftover money? I could help you. You know, we could have a workshop. We could do that. We can help you with the publication. So we made the most of the allies and opportunities. And what eventually worked is we were linking field experience in Afghanistan, in Rwanda, and whatever, with global policy work. We were bringing practitioners on board, and not only policymakers and academia. We need to work much more on practice-based evidence and not evidence-based practice. Well, as long as it's based on local practitioners' experience. We need to work at local level because that's where we will be able to address complexity, and that's where people will have to deliver. So what is it, and please leave that one a little. What we need is to know in what direction we're going, and then weather the events. And sometimes it collapses, so you're kicked out of the door, where then you go back through the window, it's no problem. And the work you have started doing, you will repackage it and reuse it. So I don't know what was the rest of my beautiful lessons learned, and I absolutely hate this format. Thank you very much.
Stay on stage.
Sorry about hating the format, but I'm serious.
It's such a tough ask. Another round of applause. It's a very tough ask, the 25 seconds, and the slide automatically goes on. Every time we got to 24 seconds, a sense of panic came over me for you. But you did very well. Another round of applause.
Thank you.
Florence, you talked about coffee, you talked about cash, and you talked about international cooperation.
Yeah.
What strikes me is that you see connections or relevances between people who don't yet see the relevances to each other yet themselves.
When I joined FAO, I found it was such a backward organization, and it was for me completely obvious that we were all working on participatory approaches, and I realized that wasn't true. So where I was coming from, which was civil society, we were way ahead than all the international...
I love it in your introduction how you said, just the usual things, MSF and saving lives, and just what we all do in our early 20s, sure.
Well, at least it got me to know what a starving child is about, and I think a lot of my colleagues have no idea. So usually I bring them to the hospitals when they come to the field so that they can talk to the mothers and figure out why. So I think that the issue, everything I've learned, has been from my work in the field, before FAO, my work in the field in FAO, and helping people build causality models of malnutrition. You start doing that, so you do it in Guatemala, in Senegal, in Nepal, wherever, and you get people, they don't care about nutrition, but they care about food, and they know why they have a problem. And you start articulating that, and that's where you see, as a professional, how building a road is linked to this market issue, but you have to look at the firewood issue at the same time, but you have that political problem, and that guy has been sent to jail, and his wife has to visit him. So you end up realizing that if you want to do something, it has to be local, it has to be integrated, and everybody needs to be on board.
So you use these methodologies to the models to see these different interactions, but is it a simple answer of we need to be using more of these methods, or is it something that we can take to other sectors, or is it something innate in you that sort of sees these connections and then is able to communicate? How much of it was learnt, and how much of it...
I built a lot on the work that was done at a certain stage by Yvan Béguin. He was using that for assessment. I learned from the Germans who were using ZOP, zeal-oriented, whatever it was, and I've adapted it. And then people say, so the most important tool for me has been these workshops. So sometimes people say, oh, you only have 1.5 days, or you can have 3 days, or I would like 5 days. And then you plan it. But the idea is to bring all the actors and bring them together across different sectors and different backgrounds and get them to, they are the ones building the causality models. We use visualization cards, and then they start organizing, and then at the same time it's training cum planning, because you get some theoretical knowledge to support what people have been working on. So you're building up capacity of local people, but you're also making bridges between health and agriculture, between, in Guatemala, the rebels and the government people who didn't want to talk to each other, but you managed to get them between foreigners in Burundi who thought that all the Burundians were a waste of time, and the Burundians that saw all those foreigners plenty of money and 4x4 cars being a pain. So you get them to work together, and after 3 days, usually they say, we need to see each other again, and we need to start moving forward. And this is not enough. Then probably what is needed is 6 months later and said, that was your consensus at that time. What worked? What didn't work? How should that change? So it's accompanying planning and capacity building.
And through a participatory approach, you get buy-in from the start with the stakeholders and the leaders at the local context.
It's the ideas the people have come up with. You complement it with participatory appraisal on the field. So I'm sorry, yes, I don't do random sampling. I go and I play with Venn diagrams and maps and focus groups and talk to old people to know how they ate when they were young. And why don't you eat any longer like when you were young? Well, we can't any longer because, etc.
And do you think we're getting better at connecting these dots in nutrition? You were in FAO for a fair while.
I've been in FAO 25 years.
Do you think the global nutrition community is getting better at seeing these connections?
I think now the nutrition sensitive is now becoming official. A lot of the work we've been doing is now published, available. There's online learning tools. So yes, I think things are moving. But we still don't give enough credit to the people who are actually doing the work in the field rather than thinking about it at university. And we would like universities to go to the field.
Very nice way to end. Thank you very much again. And over to our next speaker, Ndidi, a social entrepreneur from Nigeria.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's a wonderful pleasure to be here. I've learned a lot from all of you, and I'm coming with a different perspective, the perspective of a social entrepreneur. After many years in management consulting and in nonprofit development, my husband and I decided to start a company called Ace Foods. And Ace Foods really was established to address some of the issues we've discussed over the last day. Number one, the high rates of malnutrition in our country. In a country as big as Nigeria with about 170 million people, 37% of our children are stunted. Yet 60% of our population works in agriculture. 40 to 60% of our fruits and vegetables go to waste, and we import 90% of the processed food we consume. So Ace Foods was established to tackle these challenges and meet the needs of our people, sourcing locally and working with our farmers. Our mission is to provide nutritious food made from the best of West Africa's fruits and vegetables, and our vision is basically to be the preferred provider of food in West Africa, addressing the lives of farmers and improving the nutritional status of our people. So essentially, we're a food processing company addressing food waste from a different perspective, processing food sourced locally so that it can meet the nutritional needs of people. We have products that span the spectrum from complementary food that address moderate malnutrition, that are fortified with vitamins and minerals like a CSB made of sorghum and soya and maize. And then we have a range of spices and spreads, and our product list keeps on increasing every day. Our impact has been quite reaching. We currently are in 10 states in Nigeria with a presence in over 200 supermarkets. We export to the Netherlands and the United States. We engage 10,000 farmers. We've displaced imports for a lot of FMCG companies that were importing historically. And we also have addressed malnutrition by donating our products to IDP camps and working with a few development agencies to supply them with nutritious food. The basis of our competitiveness is really our relationship with farmers. We're not trying to displace them by going into commercial agriculture. We've put them into clusters. We provide microfinance to them. We train them. We give them improved inputs, and then we source from them. And it's been a big breakthrough because historically many of these farmers did not directly sell their produce to processors in the country. And as I mentioned, we played a role in fighting moderate malnutrition. We haven't broken through to the WFPs of the world, which prefer to import and bring into our country, but a lot of local NGOs are sourcing from us, and that's one of the issues that I'd like to bring on the table, is that as we think about supporting local farmers, we also have to think about what the role of food aid is in killing local agriculture. What are the 5 key ingredients for our success? I would say the first one is a clear vision. After years of being a consultant, and working with people in the space like many of you, it was really important to show that it could be done in our context. And so having a clear vision of local sourcing was key to our success, but it was also a big challenge. The second key was really the importance of partnerships and the importance of working with a strong group of people, the importance of strong values, governance, and a strong board from the beginning, and then starting with business-to-business relationships because we really didn't have funding to build a retail presence. I also want to mention that partnerships with funding agencies helped us in the beginning. We're beneficiaries of the Africa Diaspora Marketplace, Innovations Against Poverty, which is actually funded by the Swedish government, and Africa Enterprise Challenge Fund. And what did that funding allow us to do? Take risks, experiment, and build a local supply chain, which many, many large companies don't want to bother to do. Now, what are some of the mistakes we made? Oh, yeah, our key aspects. What sets us apart is really our local sourcing and our commitments to sourcing globally, local sourcing of globally competitive products. Now, what are some of the mistakes we made? One is product failure. When we started, actually, our first product was going to be jams. Sourced locally, processed locally, to displace the strawberry jams that were imported into our country. Very quickly, we understood that many of our fruits didn't grow all year round, and many of the packaging materials we needed were not there, and that many Nigerians wanted strawberry jam because that's what they had been conditioned to consume. Mango jam, pineapple jam, papaya jam was just too exotic for that population for now. The second was really the importance of changing mindsets, that proudly Nigerian products were just as good, if not better, than imported products. And this is a continuing struggle, as I mentioned, with the food aid organizations that prepare to import because they just don't think they can find local competitive products. Now, what advice would I give to myself if I was going to start again? Always have a plan A, B, and C. We could have closed shop if the jams failed and the baby food failed, but we clearly decided that year 3 plan was spices, and that was going to be what was really going to put us on the map. So be flexible, remain focused on your values. Now, as I round up, I just want to talk about what gets me excited about African food. If you look at the population trends, Africa's population was 477 million people in 1980, 1.2 billion in 2016, and it's going to be 2.4 billion in 2050. Now, that gives me a lot of concern because we need to feed our people, but also a lot of hope that there are SMEs that are committed to growing locally, sourcing locally, and partnering with organizations to feed ourselves and export. And that's my favorite proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. There's no way you can dramatically transform the agriculture and food space in Africa or across the world unless we work together. And our success as a company, even our moderate success, has been really linked to partnerships. And I think that's going to be key to addressing the food security crisis we all face. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ndidi. Great talk to round out the session today. I want to talk about jam, and you talked about strawberry jam. And you talked about a product that failed because it wasn't demand-driven. But sometimes great game-changing ideas have to come before the market's ready, or they may even inspire new markets. So how, as a social entrepreneur, do you manage that interface, that complexity, that to and fro? How do you know when to be ahead of market and take the risk versus follow the market and stick with strawberry jam?
Well, I would say there are a couple of indicators. Number one is, if it cannot survive on its own without subsidy in a market economy, then it's not going to be sustainable beyond interventions. And that's the problem. I just wrote a book called Social Innovation in Africa, a practical guide for scaling impact. And I found out that the number one requirement for scaling a social innovation is that it has to be demand-driven. So many of our initiatives are funded by donor funds, and then when that money runs out, we realize that the local community is not willing to pay even 10 cents for that intervention. So you have to really test whether people want it. Now, if you educate them and they still don't want it, they don't prioritize it, then I think you're barking up the wrong tree. You might need to tweak your model a bit. Now, in our case, it wasn't just that they weren't used to other jams that were made of local fruit. It was also that the packaging materials weren't available, the fruit wasn't being grown all year round, so the hurdle to climb, and then the price points was not competitive because the imports were so much cheaper than locally produced food. So when you look at those 5 indicators, then you realize maybe we need to rethink this model and then look at 5 years from now, 10 years from now, reintroducing the product when we've sorted out the supply chain, the packaging, the pricing issues, because we want to be sustainable beyond any interventions.
And what was the outcome? Did you ever bring strawberry jam back?
So we created a mixed fruit jam. You had strawberry jam.
Did you ever bring the pineapple jam back?
We created a mixed fruit jam that had every single type of product in there that's standardized, and actually watermelon proved to be the product that's available all year round. But the problem with watermelon is that it doesn't have much of a taste.
Right.
So the challenge was really saying, let's shelve this product now and come back to another product that can fill that gap, a spread that's nutritious. Because by the time you're making strawberry watermelon jam, how much nutrition, what vitamins and minerals do you have? And staying true to your focus on creating nutritious food that meets the needs of the people in the country.
So strawberry jam and a copy of your book. I've got 2 things to find this weekend. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.